Welcome to another episode of Systematic Geekology. This is a space where we seek to create and cultivate healthy conversations between those things we geek out on and the philosophical and theological questions that often arise out of our fandoms. Like, what does it mean to be human? What makes a hero? What makes a villain? How do the stories and narratives we geek out on shape how we live in the world? We are your priest to the geeks. We aren't all ordained, but we see ourselves as mediators at the intersection of geek culture and going deeper in our faith. We don't always have to agree, but we do respect each other, and we see everyone as a beloved child of God. Everyone geeks out on something, so come geek out with us and enjoy the show.
You're listening to an Anazao Ministries podcast.
Did the Joker really die when he fell off that building? Guys, we're here, part of our All Reading Counts, to talk about an audiobook. We're talking about Batman Resurrections, voted on by our dear patrons, and part of our All Reading Count series that we love doing in support of our local libraries and just because we like reading. Because if y'all didn't know, we're geeks. We're the priest to the geeks. I am Joshua Noel. I am here with my beloved co-host, the one who turned me on to this book. I can't wait to talk about the one and only, our resident scientist, Andy Walsh. How's it going, man?
Doing well, man. How are you?
Doing well. Staying busy, but having fun with it. You know, at least I'm busy with stuff I love and enjoy, and in a house that's safe. So that's
excellent.
Yeah, I'll take it what I can. So for those listening, you may know this All Reading Counts. We've been going through stuff like comic books, manga, poems. Like what counts? All reading counts. What are the benefits of reading? All that kind of stuff. And today we're going to talk about audiobooks, which has been a little bit contentious even amongst our hosts. There's some of our hosts that disagree with me. That are like, wait, that doesn't count because it's audio and it might be beneficial, but it's not reading because the definition of reading is, guess what, guys? Get over it, or we're counting audiobooks. So, guys, I can't wait for this. If you're on a laptop, please consider rating and reviewing our show on Podchaser or on Good Pods. That helps our show gain recognition, and it makes it easier to find our show in other search engines that prioritize what those platforms have to say. If you're on your phone, however, if you're not on a laptop, you're on your phone, consider rating, reviewing, or commenting on our show on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. That helps prioritize our show specifically in those apps, which is where most people listen. So thank you again so much for your support in that free, quick way where you could just leave a quick review. That helps a lot, and we appreciate it. Another thing we appreciate is our sponsors. Some people throw a little money our way because it costs money to run the show, and we really appreciate our supporters from Apple Podcasts, Captivate, and Patreon who help keep our lights on. Today, we want to do a shout out to James Barrett. Thank you so much, James. And guys, remember, if you want your own shout out, you too can support our show for $3 a month on one of those three platforms. Again, Apple Podcasts, Captivate, or Patreon. I mentioned it several times already. This is our All Reading Count series. If you want to see more of the series, there's a link in the show notes. You can see all the episodes we've done as part of this. Also, if you're wondering, like, how does this help our local libraries and you want to participate, you can actually purchase merch from our store that say All Reading Counts. I'm going to throw some up here. Andy put together. It says All Reading Counts, has, like, you know, a little list: epics, poems, novels, graphic novels, audiobooks. You can buy one of these, and what little we do make off them, we send to our local libraries and donations. You also, if you go to our Patreon and you're a free subscriber, or if you're not a subscriber at all, you can buy the bonus question from this episode, and anything that's used for that, we also donate to our local libraries in support of literacy, because literacy matters. Yeah. Other things that matter, though, are Batman. Batman matters. Yeah. And today we're going to be talking about an awesome story. But before we get into it, we want to discuss, what do we mean by all reading counts? So, Andy, when you hear the phrase all reading counts, what does that make you think of? And why do you think reading is important, in your own opinion?
All reading counts, well, it makes me think about, the very questions that you mentioned before, right? People like to draw fences around, this is what counts as reading, this is what doesn't count as reading. And I think it does a great disservice to various folks to tell them that the comic book that they're looking at or the audiobook that they listen to doesn't count as reading, because it just discourages people, right? There's lots of educational value. There's lots of just positive engagement value to letting people read what most engages them. There's a lot of reasons, various different disabilities and so forth, that comic books or audiobooks or other media might be more accessible to someone, or might just be, personality-wise, right? It's more engaging to look at pictures with your words or something like that. So yeah, I think it's a positive thing to encourage everybody to get as much exposure to the ideas that we have written down and transmitted and shared with each other in this format in whatever way that you can get a hold of them.
Yeah. No, I love it. Second, everything that Andy says. Also, part of that has to do with like the benefits of reading for me. If you look at there's medical reasons why it's important for us to read, right? Like it's good for cognitive health. It's good for retention, just exercising your imagination, all these kind of things. The vocabulary, that's stuff that helps us. It helps you engage with empathy, engaging with others. And these other forms of reading still do that, maybe to lesser degrees. Maybe, and I'm not sure, but since part of why I think it helps your cognitive ability, and for some studies show that it might even delay Alzheimer's. What am I thinking of? Dementia. Yeah. Some studies show that it might delay that. It has to do with the fact that you're exercising your brain, imagination. You're keeping that kind of skill there. And maybe sometimes if you're reading comic books, you're less imagining, but you still have to fill in the blanks between the panels. You're still imagining what the voices sound like, right? Those kind of things are still happening. So that's why I think it matters, and why all reading counts, and why I include audiobooks is you're still doing that. Cognitively, and there are studies that specifically show the healths of audiobooks compared to other books, and there are some differences, but for the most part, you get all of the same benefits. So that's a reason. And then another reason is I care a lot about the disabled community. For me, that's one of my passions. I just care about that. I know a lot of people who are blind get really offended when you say, well, they basically can't read. It's either Braille or nothing. And for a lot of them, audiobooks is their only way to read. So to discount that, I feel does a disservice as well in that way. So that's where I'm this absolutely counts, has all of the benefits, and it's just fun. Audiobooks are fun. I can multitask.
And if we're all fortunate enough to live long enough, we're probably all going to be a place where an audiobook might be an easier thing to deal with than a written book.
Yeah. That's for sure. Well, plus, audiobooks, you could do it in your car, right? Or I'm working and, I work with food. So I'm cutting up vegetables and stuff. And it's if I just have a earbud in, I'm able to consume media without having to pause my life. And yes, I would love to just be able to stop everything I'm doing and read a book. That's not my life right now. Also, that's helpful for me. Now, I do want to pause it to you because we mentioned some of the stuff that helps with the cognitive abilities and how reading helps your imagination kind of stuff. Are you in favor of when they do voices or music with an audiobook? Sometimes they'll do themes or they'll do character acting a little bit. Are you in favor of that, or do you just want the book?
I think it depends on the book. And oftentimes when they're doing that sort of thing, it's fiction and it fits better into it. I wouldn't want a dramatic reading of the latest nonfiction popular science book or something like that. Might not go over as well. But sure, and you put that in the notes, and I was kind of thinking, because I tend to think of those as they're almost more like radio dramas a lot of times, the way that they're done.
Yeah.
And so to me, that's a little bit of a different category thing, which is equally interesting. But yeah, it kind of depends on what the story is and how, if it's well done. But yeah, I don't have any objection. I've enjoyed various kinds of radio dramas and various, there's kind of the whole spectrum from just, a person reading the book to a person really kind of putting different voices and accents and different things on the different characters, to the full out, we're going to get a whole cast of people to play different parts and a Foley artist and, score or some kind of music or something. Yeah.
Yeah, it's definitely like a spectrum. I like where this book's at, where the reader does a different voice when he's reading Batman's voice or Joker, whatever. I also there's a version of The Hobbit, I don't remember who the narrator was, that I really enjoyed, where he does different voices for the characters, and they include some themes, but it's not music playing the whole time and a whole cast. I don't like when it's just the voice if it's a story. For some reason, like if you're just monotone read through a story, I'm like, nah, that puts me to sleep. But I read a lot of theology books, and I obviously don't want like voice acting and stuff in there.
Right.
I found for me, when it comes to like theology books or stuff like that, that like, or I even do like some of my homework, I just listen to the audiobook. Don't tell my teachers. But I find that it's helpful if the author of the book is the one reading it. Because sometimes like the way you do certain inflections or stuff in your voice, I'm like, okay, this is important. Or that's what he means by that sentence. Whereas if someone reads it monotone, it's different than like reading it for yourself. Sometimes if someone else is reading it, like the way they put emphasis on certain words other than other words change that meaning of the sentence. And you're like, okay, does it actually mean that? Or so it's helpful when I think the author themselves sometimes does it. What do you think?
Yeah, there are definitely certain kinds of books where, having the author read it, there are memoirs and things like that where it's really cool to hear from the actual person who wrote the book. And you'll sometimes get some additional sort of commentary or even just that emotional color of, this was something challenging to write about because it was a difficult time in my life, or it was a really exciting time in my life. And it's fun and joyful to relive that. And and that comes across more clearly if it's the person who actually had those experiences. And I think it works well for nonfiction too. Obviously, there are some folks who are better than others at reading their own books and doing audiobooks, right? Not everybody, not every scholar is a good author to a general audience. Not every scholar is a good reader of their own audiobook, but there are definitely people that do it well. And I think it helps to kind of get that more direct line to the person whose ideas you're engaging with.
Yeah. So a little bit of a weird example thought with this, and then we're going to move on to today's actual book. A while back, and I still re-listen to this sometimes because my views on inerrancy, biblical inerrancy, has changed a lot over the years. But there's a book that's the 4 views of inerrancy, something like that. I might put the link in the show notes. I might not. We'll see. But it includes 4 different authors for 4 different perspectives on inerrancy. One is Al Mohler. One is Pete Enns. I don't remember the other 2, but both of them are podcasters. So they have like the nice mic and everything already. And you can really tell when you go through this, like they're presenting their view and you're like, I can tell that this is someone who actually knows how to use a mic, who knows like how to speak well for this kind of thing. And it's fun kind of hearing their engage in one another's arguments back and forth. Then I got the physical book and I read it and I'm like, it's just better as an audiobook for that one. So I don't know if that says anything or if that just says something about me, but
no, I think there are definitely some things that work better that way. John Hodgman wrote three books, a series of 3 books that are just like made up facts for comedy purposes. And because it's kind of nonsense, they're not really the kind of thing you want to sit down and read, but to listen to him and to listen to the the additional commentary that he adds, and he brings in his friend Jonathan Colton to play some songs, and they have some back and forth banter, and it adds a real dimension to a book that's otherwise silly and funny, but a little bit kind of nothing, and so slight rather, and so I appreciated that. There are definitely things that work better in that format.
Yeah, for sure. So speaking of which, today we are talking about an audiobook, Batman Resurrection. So I'm going to do a disclaimer, and I'm going to let you answer this question first. But first part is we were going to discuss why we chose this book. We had like a series of different books we put on Patreon, and we let our patrons decide which book they wanted us to review most for the main feed, and that's why you guys are listening to this right now, because they voted for this one. We had a few different ones on there. I don't remember all of them, but if you guys want your own say in future topics when it comes to All Reading Counts, that's what we usually do. We usually ask our patrons to choose one out of a list, and we roll with what they say. So if you want to say in the episodes, you guys can go over there. Andy, this is actually one that you recommended that they voted on. Could you kind of break down like why you chose this book, and maybe what were your thoughts going in, and then I'll discuss some of my thoughts going into reading this as well.
Sure. So, I started to just compile a list because I don't listen to a lot of audiobooks, or it's not kind of the first thing that I go to. While I have, enjoyed some, it's not a thing I'm regularly engaging with. It kind of comes and goes. And so I didn't know where to start, so I just kind of looked at a list of audiobooks that were available from my local library. And then what was the intersection of that and things that had come out recently and things that I thought would be interesting that I wanted to read. and this was one of them. I was intrigued by the idea of revisiting the continuity of the Tim Burton Batman movies and trying to fill in the gaps there. Didn't really know what to expect from that. Haven't read anything else by this author. Don't think I've ever read another like Batman novelization. And so I was just kind of curious what it would be like, how it would be to engage with a Batman story that didn't have either moving or still pictures to go along with it. And yeah, and I haven't. It's a movie I saw once in college and I hadn't been back to, and so it was also just kind of interesting to revisit that world and kind of be reminded of what it was like and to see if it still was interesting 20 some odd years later, 30 years later.
Oh man, that's funny. I thought that you chose this because you're just like maybe a huge Tim Burton Batman fan, because those are people who are like die on this film franchise. I like them. Weirdly enough, so the first one with Jack Nicholson's Joker, that this is going to end up being kind of like a sequel to this story that we're talking about today. I love it. He is my favorite live action Joker. Obviously, the best Joker is Mark Hamill. I'm sorry, not sorry, but I loved his Joker. I loved his portrayal. I loved that film. And then the other films end up getting to like this weird, cheesy, campy, fun stuff that I'm like, I loved it, but it almost just doesn't match the vibe of that original movie. So then when you had this book up there, I was like, I'm concerned because this could either be an audiobook version of like those kind of like Mr. Freeze kind of movies, or the book could have been more in line with that original movie. And I was like, a little concerned. I mean, I love the campy stuff. I love Mr. Freeze. Like Arnold Schwarzenegger, Mr. Freeze is hilarious. It's not something I want to listen to. It's something I enjoy because like as a kid, it was great. And now I'm like, this is hilarious and campy. And I don't know if that would translate to a book. And I was like, I don't know. I was kind of hesitant going in. Plus, a lot of times these books are done and it's kind of just like a cash grab and it's basically just like fanfics. But man, I got to say, reading this, I really loved it. I thought this was a great story. I'm glad I knew what the canon was, that it was like in canon with the Tim Burton universe and it was after that film, because otherwise I think I might have been confused, because I'm like, some of this stuff is just not what happens in Batman world. But knowing that going in, I think helped me a lot. Yeah. What were your thoughts? Like, so you said going in, you weren't sure what to expect. After you watched it, are you like, read it? Are you like super thumbs up? That was a great book. Or are you just kind of like, it was a good book?
I would probably put it more in the solid category than great. I think it's a challenging exercise, right? To kind of fit in between books, between stories. The prequel curse is a thing that has sunk many a storytelling endeavor. But yeah, I liked the way it was very, very much in that specific Tim Burton Batman world. And I had to go back and watch the movie again after I read the book, because I wanted to be reminded of just how much was being taken from that world specifically. Because it it did jog my memory even as I was going through the book, like, oh yeah, I remember that bit, or I know why he's doing it this way or that way. But yeah, it is a very specific take on Batman, and this is a very, very detailed. A lot of the characters come back. There are references to events, right? Anytime there's an opportunity for something to build on or be a continuation of something that happened in the movie, it seems like they've made the effort to include that instead of adding new characters or inventing new events or what have you. It draws very heavily from the film, and so I think that helped. Even though there is no visual component to the audiobook, there are those visuals that go along with it, right? There's those very distinctive Tim Burton, Gotham, Gothic visuals that you can picture. And there's enough of the personality of Batman and Alfred and Vicky Vale and so forth in the writing that you can see the connection to the Michael Keaton portrayal and so forth.
Yeah, no, for sure. Yeah, no, I thought it was good. I'm with you. I'm not sure if I would go as far as great. I might go great, but not excellent. I really enjoyed it a lot more than I thought I would. I think going in being hesitant, like I ended up setting a really low bar. So then I was kind of blown away. I was like, oh, this is actually just really good storytelling. So that's cool. I think the cool thing about like it being a book too is like a lot of times like Batman, when he's in graphic novel or in comics, they don't have as much time to flesh out what's happening between the events, you know. But here we kind of also you get to hear like Batman's inner monologue a little bit more. You get to kind of hear like, oh, this is what Batman's thinking. This is why he does what he does. So I kind of fleshed out the character a little bit in a fun way. I enjoyed that a lot. Yeah, just overall, I liked it. I found one thing that I was doing that was kind of funny though, and it was from the beginning, which is why I'm surprised that something that happened surprised me. Because from the very beginning, the way that he's reading Batman's voice, he does like a voice change for it. I just immediately started imagining all the characters in their like Arkham Knight, Arkham City, Arkham Origin, like the video games. Like I was imagining those versions of the characters while I was reading. And then I still got surprised by that one twist that's definitely just like part of the plot of one of the video games. I was like, how did I not see that? Oh man, it was good stuff though. So as far as the plot, it's a good story. I do recommend people reading it. Basically, the Joker might be back. Batman's having a little paranoia, and then all of a sudden, due to some shenanigans, you know, people are still dealing with Smilex, so they have like those smiles on their face, so it's causing PTSD and all this stuff. And what Tim Burton did well, this book does well, of Gotham is its own character. The city itself is kind of its own character, right? So you see that like PTSD culturally is impacting everyone. Longer story short, there's an actor who gets infected with a different variant of it who ends up becoming Clayface. And Batman's basically trying to figure out who is this new Joker who ends up being Clayface. And you kind of know about it the whole time, which I think is what allowed them to pull off the other surprise where the doctor who's been, quote, helping people turns out to be Hugo Strange, who is, I don't know how mainstay of a villain he is in Batman world, but he is a villain who basically is like Hitler, Diet Hitler. And, you know, he's trying to create army of clay people, make everybody do his bidding, etc., etc. Surprisingly, Batman wins the day. No, what's actually surprising though is Clayface ends up helping Batman win the day. So I think really the large part of the story, and I'm trying to remember the guy's name, is the guy who becomes Clayface in kind of his redemption arc to what happened to him. I think is the large crux of the story. Do you remember his name? Like, who's the guy who becomes Clayface? Why am I struggling?
Right. Well, his stage name is Boris Karloff. Is that right?
That sounds right.
I am not confident that I remember his actual like birth name, but I'm pretty sure that that's the stage name and the name that gets used the most often in the book.
All right. Original Clayface's full name is Basil Karloff.
Basil Karloff.
Okay, let's see. He's an actor, serial killer. Man, a lot of people have used his. I don't know. A lot of people have used his name. It turns out, but yeah. We'll go with Basil Karloff. But yeah. So it was interesting. He was basically not a very good actor, and he was helping the lead actor get some makeup that ended up being experimented on using some variant of Smilex. Turns him into gooey flesh that he's a shapeshifter. I mean, I feel like that's the easy way to say it. The way the book describes it was scary enough that I feel like I now understand how they're going to create the Clayface horror movie that they're going to do. Yeah. Were you thinking anything about that when they were describing like his transformation? Did you have like in the back of your mind that Clayface movie that they're making up soon?
A little bit. I mean, you know, Clayface, I think, was one of those standout characters for me from the animated series. I felt like that was a place where he really kind of came into his own, and so it didn't surprise me that they would be doing a Clayface movie. And I didn't necessarily have a hard time seeing that as a thing. But yeah, I get what you're saying about the visuals. You know, the description of the transformation process could clearly inform, you know, the visuals of how they might approach that in a film.
Yeah. I think it's Mike Flanagan. That's what it was. Because he's the one doing the movie. And that's what I was struggling with. Is I'm like, I can see a Clayface movie, but seeing it as something he would do as well. Because like for me, and I think part of it is also the I love the Harley Quinn series HBO's been doing. And in there, Clayface is kind of a silly character, right? Because he's a failed actor. He's kind of the comic relief. He's like, I could pretend to be anyone, but he's not very good because he was never a good actor. Like, that's part of his storyline. And I was like, okay, this is kind of silly. He's a funny character. Mike Flanagan's doing this. What? But then I'm reading reading this book, and I'm like, oh yeah, no, actually, the idea of your flesh suddenly becoming goo and being able to shapeshift and not knowing what's happening to your own body and being blamed for stuff that didn't happen. And it's like, oh yeah, this stuff actually can be pretty scary.
Yeah, and he's also, I think he's, I haven't seen the Harley Quinn show, but I suspect he's a little bit more menacing in the animated series version.
Oh yeah,
and in some of the different comics, sometimes he even gets that kind of like Sandman, I can be much bigger than a normal human kind of thing going on. And so, yeah, I think there's a lot of opportunity for that. And then, the body horror aspects of your body kind of betraying you that way.
Yeah. Well, and that's what's so part of the plot that was interesting too, is like, because of what was going on with his body, and it also impacted his brain, like his ability to like just kind of control himself. So his mind's also being kind of impacted by these drugs. He ends up being the cause of some pretty terrible things that happened, and he's not really a bad guy. He's just, stuff happened to him. He was like a victim of circumstance, and then because of what happened to him, other people died. Other stuff happened in the story that like, and then he ends up in a situation that he feels like he can't get out of. So he's talked into playing the role of the Joker, doing all of these terrible things to hurt Gotham, when really he didn't have much say in what happened to him.
Yeah, it's definitely more of a tragic story than I'm a scheming mastermind kind of character. He doesn't really remember. It takes him a while to even remember who he is, right? Because his body's gone through this transformation, so he doesn't know exactly who he is at first. And then there's a recurring motif of where like he sort of loses concentration or loses focus, and his body loses focus as well, and becomes a bit more amorphous, and that's a challenge for him. Yeah.
Well, and you mentioned the body horror too. Like part of what got me was the description where he's trying to talk, but he couldn't. It's just coming out in noises until he starts shaping his body to pretend to be other people. And then you get this whole commentary on like he never learned how to be himself, and you're like, oh man, that's like, not only is that like philosophically that's deep, but also you're like, oh, that is scary. Imagine like you just wake up one day and you can't speak in your own voice anymore. I don't know. Some of that I was like, ooh. And then when everything happened, I'm kind of like, I really hope Batman doesn't just like beat the crap out of this guy, because like I was kind of rooting for him, honestly. Yeah, but you mentioned evil mastermind also. He might not have been an evil mastermind, but there was an evil mastermind in the story. For those who aren't aware of who Hugo Strange is, could you kind of break down a little bit, who is Hugo Strange? When did you first encounter him, and what role does he play in this story?
Yeah, I'm not sure I'm up on all of the different Hugo Strange incarnations, but generally he is someone in the psychology, psychiatry, kind of neuroscience kind of field, has an academic background, and usually generally some kind of clinical background along with that. And there's often an element of impersonation or disguise to his stories as well. He's usually pretending to be somebody else. I think he might have gotten to be more popular because there was a notable storyline where he impersonated Batman, and so there's like action figures of him dressed as Batman and all this kind of thing. So he's kind of he's a little bit like Scarecrow, but without the fear toxin, right? His whole thing is like messing with people's heads and confusing them about almost kind of like gaslighting people. Basically, is kind of his MO. So he's been in the Arkham games, as you show here. He's been on the animated series for an episode. He was on the Gotham TV show, at least briefly. So he's one of these characters that if you need somebody in that vein, you can come back to him. I'm trying to remember if I think he might have been referenced in the Penguin. The recent Penguin show as well, because that got into a lot of like psychiatry and people in mental hospitals and so forth. He's kind of like the go-to, just like if there's a reporter involved, it's going to be Lois Lane or Ben Urich, depending on which universe you're in. If you need a lawyer, it's She-Hulk or Matt Murdock, whatever. If you need an evil psychiatrist for a Batman story, it's going to be Hugo Strange.
Yeah. Man, no, I like that. I loved his story in the Arkham games. Yeah, I thought, see, part of me thought that might have been why you chose him. Is like, I thought you were like, I chose this book because of how they portrayed the scientist, because it's like there is a little bit of a trope of evil scientist, right? And I'm like, oh, Andy is a scientist. He probably has some interesting commentary on why this happened.
I mean, I did not know. I didn't actually read that far ahead to get a sense when I first picked the book to get a sense of like who the characters in the story would be, other than it was a continuation of the Batman film. So yeah, it was kind of a surprise to me as I was going along that Clayface was involved and that Hugo Strange was involved. Yeah, I mean, certainly. I mean, there are certainly examples from 1930s Germany and other places of people misusing medical science and psychological science to manipulate people or just to further their own ends. And so I think that's part of where that trope comes from, especially if you're doing a scientist character who is in that sort of psychology realm and who has a Teutonic background of sorts, right? That's an easy character to fall into. And they're just, I mean, we don't have to go into a lot of it, but there's a lot of uncertainty about scientists and whether they have what their real motives are, and whether it's appropriate to exercise that level of control over the world around us. And so I can understand why sometimes that raises questions in people's minds. I think it's unfortunate that it's pretty easy to think of stories in which the scientist goes wrong or goes bad or is evil from the start. I think you can probably rattle off a lot more of those off the top of your head before you come up with characters where scientists are the heroes. But such as it is. Yeah,
I mean, it's interesting. It's funny because I'm really anti Iron Man. I think you know that, but like Bruce Banner, fantastic. Mr. Fantastic. I think there are some of like the few like where I'm like, oh yeah, good guy scientist. But yeah, a lot of times, same thing happened with Priest too. Usually when you see a priest, they end up being like bad guy or like secretly, they're doing this other thing or whatever. It's actually like I'm rewatching Daredevil because the new series starts the day we're recording this, and I'm like, man, it is just so surprising that popular television did such a good portrayal of some religious people. Like Catholics are usually bad guys secretly or something. Like watch The Nun, and you're like, yeah, okay, that's what the world thinks of us. But yeah, so it's nice when you have the opposite. Unfortunately, that's not what we have here. We do have scientist bad guy, but
yeah. Although there is a physician in the Smilex ward of the hospital that is working with Bruce Wayne, who is a positive character in the story, and who is actually generally helping the Smilex victims and compassionate towards them and trying to provide them with a better future.
Nice, yeah. I forgot about that. The way to find the good. Going back to our annual theme this year. You found it. Oh man. But so the story as a whole, before we get into some like the deeper themes and stuff we want to talk about, if you had to rate it 0 to 10, where would you rate this particular story?
Yeah, I'd probably put it in like 6 or 7.
All right. Yeah, I was thinking like 7 or 8. I liked it a lot. It's not like my favorite audiobook or anything, but I liked it a lot. I would probably listen to it again. I'd be down,
just the other day they announced a sequel, and I'm definitely curious to check that out. So
yeah, I'm totally down for that. Yeah, because it was good. It was good enough that it was worth my time. That's what I'll say. Yeah. So speaking of the deeper themes, so this is part of what I really liked was how they did kind of pick at these themes. You have a lot of this like dealing with our own limits. What is Batman's limit? Is he pushing himself too far? Our own finitude, like you won't be here forever kind of stuff. I liked those themes. Some of the other themes that I liked better was kind of like had to do with the fallout. So we saw what Joker did with Smilex, how it impacted the whole city of Gotham. And then we see like how systemic sin works, right? Like the way the system itself is set up, people like Barlos just can't get ahead, right? Like he's already like working, trying to make himself as an actor. He can't really do it. And then because someone else not related to him did, his mind gets warped, his body gets warped. He's painted a villain, and even if he does change his ways, which he does in the book, spoiler, and I like what happened to him, you also you just realize that like it's hard to imagine a true happy ending for this guy, right? Like his body might never be the same, and even if it is, he's just going to go back to being the kind of person who is so down the totem pole, like down, class wise in Gotham that he's forced to like do whatever he can to scrape by. And then that's where one of the positive things that Batman does in the story is like it actually shows Bruce Wayne using his wealth for good, showing that, yeah, systemic problems are just as important as punching the bad guy in the face. And, funding research for Smilex, all this stuff, like actually finding a way that our systems are flawed and trying to fix that is just as important as, other superheroics, I guess. What did you think of like that part of the storyline? Just kind of dealing out with fallout and systemic problems.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's and I think I've discussed this on the podcast before. It's a popular criticism of Batman that, why doesn't he use his money to fix problems instead of just punching people? And, there's a long history of him doing both. And this is yet another example of that. So the Smilex ward that I mentioned, like he's the main, if not sole, funding source for that, right? He's making sure that these people get the treatment that is available, the best that might be available, right? That it's a new condition, they're still trying to figure things out. They don't have all the solutions, but they're making the effort to assist these people as best they can. And he cares about that, and he comes by the Smilex ward and checks in on people, and knows some of the people by name, right? He's not just writing a check, but he is more personally engaged with that, and I think that's positive to see. And there is, going back to the film and the world that Tim Burton created, right? It definitely is that kind of like there's the 1% of the 1%, and then there's everybody else just sort of scraping by, and so it is an environment that's very much set up to tell those kinds of stories, where nobody has there just aren't that many opportunities to go around, and they use that to start seeding some plot threads that will eventually become Batman Returns as well, right? So it's not just looking back; it's also looking forward. And so Selina Kyle's kind of caught up in all that, and that that's something that the second film explores further.
Hello, friends. If you enjoy Systematic Ecology, a great way to support us and to keep us moving forward into the future is to be a patron on our Patreon network. If you're a Patreon, then you get live access to our YouTube exclusives like Comic Book Ketchup and Manga Mustard, Drinks with Tejas, and also some extra content there with our companion series to go along with our annual theme. If you're a patron, you get exclusive merch like t-shirts and handbags and mugs. There's also a bonus extra question that has extra content. In each episode, we go deeper into our faith and the questions that we're wrestling with, but we also do this extra question to jump in and share about, and patrons get to hear how we answer that question. There's discounts on our store. You get access to any future online D&D campaigns. You can easily access all of our Patreon content through our Spotify page where it says exclusive content for subscribers. That could be you folks. And all that being said, you get the satisfaction that you help us keep the lights on and keep us moving forward with our software, our marketing, our equipment, staying current in the podcast game. We love Systematic Ecology. We hope you do too. Support us moving forward. Thank you for all that you are. We know there's a lot of great choices and content out there, and you choose to listen to Systematic Ecology. Thanks, folks. We love you. Peace.
I'm a little bit torn on the idea, right? Because that he's entirely a victim in this situation, because he did Basil did play a little bit fast and loose with the request that was made of him to source stage makeup, and he was interested in sabotaging the career of this actor who he was the understudy to or what have you. So I'm not sure that he's not completely without fault. He's not totally unrelated to the events that happened, but it is out of proportion to the choices that he made, and the things that happened to him were not all of his making. I mean, even like when he was being the Joker, he definitely did some stuff that you didn't have to do that, right? And like you said, like he wanted to sabotage the guy's career, but it was like everything just ended up being blown out of proportion. Like, and maybe that's its own separate commentary that
obviously this isn't a Christian book, so it's not about Christian ideas, but like when we think of like sin too, you know, I'm reminded of the one VeggieTale episode with Larry Boy, what a little white lie can turn into or whatever, you know, like sometimes you do like a small thing because you're like, it's not that big of a deal. And then it turns out to be a big deal. And you're like, crap, I can't take this back now. What do I do? So that's where I'm like, you know, maybe it's just good to try to do the right thing all the time anyway. But yeah, like going back to what you were saying though, like it was out of proportion, like the consequences of what happened to him. And that had to do with like the systemic stuff we were both mentioning. And like bringing that to real world, it's just like you see like certain crimes that I still would say is a crime. It is crime. You know, certain drugs are illegal in America, but it's interesting how the kind of drugs that typically white people tend to illegally participate in, as opposed to how black people participate in, you see like the punishment is disproportionate. And it's kind of like, well, sometime when the system's set up that way, like you know what I mean? Like it's still, hey, maybe let's not have illegal drugs, but at the same time, we need to work on our system alongside hoping that people also make better decisions, I guess.
Yeah. You know, there was an episode of the Complexity podcast. It's a science podcast put out by the Santa Fe Institute, where they were talking about, you know, systemic justice issues and so forth. And they gave the example that, you know, if you have a society where a particular group of people, in our case, you know, black people are feared slightly more, right? People are just a little bit more wary of folks from that community for whatever reason, right? And that might actually be, you know, that might actually be racist in some fashion, right? But just that little bit of a difference, just that little bit of bias, compounds and perpetuates through the entire justice system to result in folks winding up in prison much more, you know, at a much higher rate than the population rate, or relative to even the number of crimes that are being committed, right? So if they're perceived as a little bit more intimidating, then they're more likely to be involved in crimes of all the different crimes of property. They're more likely to be involved in like direct, I forget which one, but like muggings and like direct interaction crime where you are taking something from somebody, you know, in front of their face, right? Which means that they're more likely to be, those are the kinds of crimes that are more likely to be prosecuted because you have an eyewitness to identify the perpetrator. And so it's easier to investigate and identify and arrest somebody. And then, you know, that perpetuates through the system. So they had this, you know, mathematical model of a criminal justice system where there was just this one small bias and everything else was completely completely unbiased, right? All the actual prosecution of crimes, you know, the jury decision. And they're not saying that this is necessarily how the world works. They're just saying that even in a system where almost everything is unbiased, if you just have this one small bias, it snowballs into a much bigger one.
Yeah. No, for sure. And I mean, I think we're probably getting ready to see that here in America. I mean, every president has a thing where, you know, they like, hey, we won't prosecute this and much, whatever this and much, all this stuff. And you can tell that each time that presidents do this, we're like, we're not going to prosecute, you know, marijuana, something that Joe Biden did. You see that there has a real effect in the real world with that. I'm interested to see now that Donald Trump's decided that they're basically just not prosecuting white collar criminals that like, you know, they're not putting any resources into that. So it's like, well, now I kind of know who that's speaking to, what's likely to happen. And I think that probably will throw everything out of proportion. And that's where you get these huge systemic issues. Unfortunately, the government has yet to hire its own Batman. So I don't know how we're going to solve it. That's clearly the only solution.
Yes, obviously.
Yeah. Oh, man. But no, well, what is the solution? Is this just like well, that sucks? Or is there something we can do about it? Or is it like, you don't know either?
I mean, you know, there are obviously the things where, you know, we can do our best to eliminate the biases that we know about. We can continue to identify biases. We can, you know, not do things like where we announce, well, we're not going to enforce this law or that law or so forth, right? You know, I'm a big fan of we should either fairly and uniformly enforce the laws that we have or get rid of them. You know, to use a non-legal example, but, you know, kind of illustrate this sort of thing. our church, the church that we used to go to, had, our kids were in the children's ministry. Right? We dropped them off at Sunday school and picked them up and so forth. We knew the whole process de facto. And then I volunteered to work with the youth group, and I got like the 12-page document that was all the policies of how they work with kids. And it was completely different from what actually happened. And I went, but why, if this is what's on the books, why don't we do any of these things? And I think there are lots of, there are examples of that in actual criminal justice as well, where, as you say, drug laws, and even with this, specific substances, obviously enforcement of marijuana is widely variable. And, even widely varied in its legality at the moment across different states. And other things, right? Where there's a lot of latitude about whether we enforce something or not. That gives a lot of opportunity for people to introduce their own biases into who they decide to enforce that law on and who they decide not to. And so, that's one area where I think we need laws that we can enforce uniformly, that don't, as much as possible, don't rely on people deciding whether or not to enforce them, people deciding whether or not, it was even a crime, right? We needed things to be as clear cut and as objective as possible when it's a crime, when this law applies, when we're going to enforce it, so that we don't have those kinds of biases. You're probably never going to completely be able to eliminate bias. And especially at the individual level, right? And so, the other thing is just to have systems and checks and balances and so forth, and appeals processes, right? That's the other thing. You don't want one person making a decision. You want a bunch of people involved in the decision process so that they can hopefully balance each other out in terms of their particular biases or shortcomings or what have you.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, and I think it's one of those where, like, we should just try not to get disheartened. I think everyone would be surprised at how much good a single person can do just in general. But when it comes to the systemic stuff, you see this in not just like this book, an overarching Batman story. Gotham doesn't really get better. Like Batman stops the bad guys. Gotham doesn't really get better. And I think the story really is like, even if we had a superhero, the only thing that's really going to make a difference is if we get involved more, right? Like, I think part of what the Batman story tells us is like, hey, we need to get involved. Go to your local, boards, do local elections. Don't just worry about the big 4-year stuff, and like figure out like who is actually caring about like whether or not, like you're talking about, like systems are fair, if things are prosecuted evenly, if we're actually enforcing the law, or we're just like, we'll enforce it over here but not over here. Figure out who cares and get involved on a local level, because a lot of this, like, you can see across America, certain cities vary vastly when it comes to crime and all this kind of stuff, and it has to do with like how people locally are choosing to engage in their politics and whether or not people are being treated fairly. And so I think just caring about our local politics makes maybe more of a difference than punching the Joker in the face or throwing him off a building. Yeah, that's just me.
Yeah. Or the other reading is that of the meta Batman story is that we're the villains, right? Because we keep wanting to read these stories, which is the reason why Gotham can never get better, because there always has to be another issue of Batman.
That's true. Maybe Batman needs to pull a Deadpool and come after us. Leave the story, come after us. Oh man, great stuff. Well, hey, I love talking about this. Hopefully this was helpful to people. If they want to stick around, we're going to do a bonus question for subscribers at the end. We're going to ask, if we had to stay the night in Arkham, who would we most want to have as a prison mate? If we had to, like, we're not just choosing to go to Arkham, but if we're going to be there, what Batman villain would we most want to be in there with us, I guess? So, do you want to hear that? Head over to Patreon, Captivate, Apple Podcasts, and you can hear us answer that question. And whatever money you throw our way, we will give to our local libraries. Speaking of local libraries, Andy mentioned he rented this audiobook off a local library. Yeah, they have apps now. You can get audiobooks from your local library. And if you didn't know, if they don't have a book that you want, you can just request it and they'll put it in there. So any books we talk about, if you just don't want to pay for them, support your local library by asking them to buy it. I know that sounds counterintuitive, but it actually does help the library if you do that kind of stuff. And with that, we don't do just normal recommendations on these episodes. We recommend a book from a different kind of literature. So it can't be an audiobook. that we think people would benefit from if they took the time to read. What might you recommend? I'm trying to think of mine. Do you have one easy at the top of your head? Because I'm struggling. Oh, I just thought of one.
The first thing that came to mind was, if you're interested in Batman continuity extensions, there is the Batman 66 comic book that takes place in the Adam West world of Batman and kind of develops that rogues gallery further. So those are fun and well done. I don't remember exactly how many collections there are or whatever, but there's a few volumes of that now that are available.
Okay, very nice. I'm gonna go with a graphic novel. Yeah, Dietrich Bonhoeffer, The Faithful Spy, and The Plot to Kill Hitler. I'm trying to remember who the author was. John Hendricks. So I recommend checking that out. Great book. We'll actually talk to John Hendricks about a different book that he wrote recently. So on our show, Mythmakers, and I picked up that book on Bonhoeffer that he did, and it's really good. It's like somewhere between a novel and a graphic novel. So if you're interested in different formats and stuff, I think that's totally worth a shot. Guys, again, we got to remind you, if you're on a laptop, please do us that favor. Consider rating and reviewing our show on Podchaser or on Good Pods. One of those two helps our show gain recognition and make it easier to find on other search engines like Google, who tends to prioritize what those things think for some reason. If you're on your phone, consider rating, reviewing, or commenting on our show on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. That's going to help prioritize our show in those algorithms, and that's what most people listen to their podcasts on, so that helps a lot. Thank you again in advance. It really does help a ton. We're also really appreciative of our sponsors, including our supporters on Apple Podcasts, Captivate, and Patreon. Today, again, we're shouting out James Barrett. Thank you again, James. You rock. This episode isn't possible without you. And remember, our patrons voted on today's episode. If you wanted a different audiobook to be chosen, you should have been over on Patreon. You could have voted. Or if you just wanted to more strongly emphasis that we should have done this, again, Patreon guys. Or, Apple Podcasts, Captivate, $3 a month. We'll also shout you out on our episodes. So thank you guys. Remember, you can listen to all of our All Reading Counts episodes in the link down below. If you purchase any of the stuff, the merch, the bonus question, all those donations go to our local libraries. We love our local libraries, so help us help them. And remember, we're all a chosen people, a geekdom of priest. Later, guys.
Hey guys, Christian here. Have you ever wondered why you should become a patron? Well, let me help you out. Because if you become a patron, what you can do is have live access to our YouTube exclusives like Comic Book Ketchup, Drinks with Teachers, Manga Mustard, and a companion series that go along with our annual theme. You can be there live, commenting with us. We really want you there. You also get access to exclusive merch. We have t-shirts, mugs, handbags, long sleeve shirts, all over the place for you, for your help in helping us. Also, we have extra bonus questions for you to look at. We have 4 to 8 times a month doing that. We have exclusive Discord channels for you, discounts at our store, access to any future D&D campaigns, and you can easily access all the patron content through our Spotify page at the top where it says exclusive content for subscribers. Also, one of the new things we're adding is voting privileges for future episode topics. We're going to be doing specific things for you, voted by the patrons, and you also get that extra satisfaction of just helping us out, and we appreciate all you do.
Hi, my name is TJ, and I'm here to tell you about the Anazal Ministry Podcast Network. We have a bunch of shows on AMP. You can follow the entire network in a single feed on Spotify at Anazal Ministry Podcasts or on the network page on Apple Podcasts. Some of the ones we're running right now are The Homily, which is Pastor Will's homily messages from Holy Trinity Lutheran Church in Chapel Hill. We have the Whole Church Podcast, which one of my favorites. It's where myself and Joshua, we interview leaders from different denominations and backgrounds to work for a full church unity, Big C. We have My Seminary Life by Brandon Knight, former host on Systematic Geekology. He discusses his experience at seminary and discusses seminary topics so anyone can access the knowledge, which is kind of cool. It's like the book, everything you learn in business school and then everything you don't learn at business school. It's great. We have Let Nothing Move You by Christian Ashley. He goes through the Bible kind of like it's a Bible study to explain the biblical narrative through his perspective and what he's learned. Dummy for Theology, which is Joshua's show. He discusses various theological topics in an attempt to show every side of big discussions. That leaves you with more questions than answers, which everyone loves a lot. It's kind of a continuation of a series that we did on Whole Church, but it's really good. It's really fun. We have the Bible After Hours, where the foul-mouthed preacher goes through the Bible from a progressive view to challenge the status quo of the modern church. I love that one. If you're from a more conservative background, that one I find will probably be the most helpful for you. Definitely check that out. And we have the Clydes. Taylor and Elizabeth Clyde go through weekly discussions in a devotional, conversational method to help us get closer to one another and God. That's just a little review of what we do in AMP and all of our other shows. So check that out, get subscribed, and just start getting all that free content, you know?